Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Elaine had learned early in marriage that the loudest thunder doesn't always come with lightning. Sometimes it arrived softly, in a muttered lie or a quiet deflection. She used to believe that a man's home was his peace, but with Roland, peace often felt like something she had to buy on credit. In the quiet neighborhood of Westmere, their flat sat like a well-wrapped gift, modest but decent, with curtains Elaine had sewn herself and a flower pot that bloomed more than her husband's affection. Roland always walked in like a man returning from battle, slouching into the chair with the same old sigh and rubbing his neck as though carrying the weight of 10 nations. "Business slow today," he would grunt. And Elaine, wearing the apron of patience and the scarf of resignation, would nod and say, "We thank God." Even when she longed for more, just a little more, she swallowed it like bad medicine and told herself, "At least he comes home." But even that comfort had begun to curdle. Because home had started to feel like a place Roland merely passed through, like a tired traveler resting at a bus stop while his heart boarded another ride. There was something in the way Roland looked at his phone these days that made Elaine feel like a ghost. Not angry, not even bitter, just invisible. He guarded the device like it held national secrets, only relaxing when it was tucked under his pillow. Once, while clearing the laundry basket, she'd found a perfume scent lingering on his shirt. Not hers, not anything she owned. A scent too bold, too fruity, too trying. That night, he'd blamed it on a female client who'd leaned over his shoulder to sign a delivery sheet. Elaine had laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because even his lies no longer tried to impress her. She saw through them like glass smeared with fingerprints. Yet she said nothing, not because she was weak, but because silence had become her shield. Some battles weren't fought with raised voices, but with closed lips and open eyes. He turned their marriage into a theater, and she had chosen to be the audience rather than the clown. Still, when he returned late one Friday night with a slightly drunk smile and whispered, "I got lucky tonight. Big contract coming soon," she wanted to ask what kind of contract came with lipstick on the receipt. But she bit her tongue, nodded again, and went back to her folding, creasing his shirt sleeves as if she were pressing her heart into fabric. Phew. Elaine's salon business ran from the small corridor beside their kitchen, no more than 2 plastic chairs and a wall mirror chipped at the edges. It was humble work, but it earned her respect in the neighborhood. Young girls came for cornrows and school braids, older women for Sunday curls, and sometimes just to pour out their hearts while Elaine massaged oil into their scalps. She was like a human diary, receiving stories, holding secrets, never judging. Yet she rarely spoke about her own life, not even to Mama Agnes, who had known her since her days in slippers and thread-wrapped hair. Not even when she wanted to scream. She carried her pain like a baby on her back, tightly tied with the wrapper of dignity. But she noticed the changes. She saw the way Roland dressed up on weekends, even when he claimed he was just doing delivery drops. She saw how his scent changed, how his skin glowed, how his wallet no longer gasped in hunger. Yet he still told her to hold body when she asked for new towels, told her these things can wait when she hinted at a short break in Obudu just to rest. Meanwhile, her instincts whispered louder than his lies, and her dreams of a love that poured back into her remained locked in a cupboard, gathering dust. One Wednesday afternoon, after braiding a schoolgirl's hair into clean lines, Elaine sat to stretch her back and sip warm water. The radio hummed softly beside her, and the scent of coconut oil clung to the air like a gentle perfume. Her mind wandered back to the early days when Roland used to call her his peace in a noisy world. She had believed him then, believed that love didn't need grand gestures, just small consistencies. But what she had mistaken for contentment had become his excuse for neglect. He mistook her endurance for satisfaction, her silence for naivety. But the heart sees even when the mouth doesn't speak. That day, a neighbor dropped by for a quick retouch and casually mentioned seeing Roland at a high-end boutique cafe near Crown Street. He was laughing, "Oh, with one babe like that, you sure say he wasn't your cousin?" she teased. Elaine had smiled like someone offering thanks at a funeral and replied, "Maybe." But inside, her ribs tightened like a drum. Her instincts had knocked again, and this time she opened the door. That night, Roland came home with his usual yawn and lie, and as he dropped his worn-out shoes beside the door, Elaine looked at them and thought even shoes that carry secrets eventually wear out. Something in her chest began to simmer, not rage, but readiness. She didn't know what she would do next. But she knew she wouldn't keep watching the movie he called marriage from the same seat forever. Something had to give, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to rise. Elaine had learned how to read silence the way others read books. That morning, she stood in front of her wardrobe, selecting one of her older wrappers, not because she lacked options, but because certain fabrics wrapped her pain more securely than words ever could. Roland had left in his usual haste, muttering something about a supplier delay and a fuel scarcity in the mainland. She hadn't asked, not because she believed him, but because asking had become a fruitless exercise, like planting seeds on cement. As she arranged her hair with wooden pins and reached for the container of shea butter on the dresser, she spotted something curled beside his discarded wallet, a small ATM withdrawal slip. The amount wasn't outrageous, but it was enough to raise a brow, especially since yesterday he had insisted they postpone fixing the leaky kitchen tap because things were tight. Elaine held the slip for a moment, then slid it beneath her pillow without a word. Her day was only beginning, and already lies were rising like heat from concrete. She left the house without eating, locking the front door with a mechanical precision that came from habit, not peace. At the junction, the Kiki driver greeted her warmly and asked if she wanted her usual drop to Westline Market. She nodded, managing a polite smile. She wasn't in the mood for conversation. Her mind had already begun to unravel threads Roland believed were hidden. By the time she reached her corner at Westline, the neighborhood was already a humming hive of activity. Vendors unzipping umbrellas, children racing in their uniforms, early shoppers haggling over bunches of plantain. Elaine unlocked the iron gate leading to her salon corridor and swept the floor with her short-handled broom. The scent of dried hair cream and powdered talc still clung to the air from yesterday. She lit a stick of incense and propped the main door open with a stack of old newspapers. Her first client, a young student named Debbie, arrived just after 9, her eyes half-lidded with sleep. "Auntie Elaine, I want center parting today, not side," she murmured while removing her scarf. Elaine nodded, parting her hair gently with a warm-toothed comb. They sat in silence for a while, save for the soft clicks of her comb and the distant honks of passing buses. Halfway through the braids, Debbie asked, "Auntie, you day okay?" Elaine hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'm just tired. That's all." But tired didn't quite capture it. It wasn't the kind of fatigue that sleep could fix. It was the kind that sat behind her eyes and pressed on her ribs. As she sectioned the last row of Ebby's hair, her mind wandered again to the ATM slip, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, the way Roland now kept his phone on silent. Her heart was not broken yet, but it was preparing itself, quietly folding inward like laundry before the rain. Later that afternoon, as the sun leaned lazily into the sky, Elaine decided to run a short errand to the supermarket nearby. She needed more detangling spray and conditioner, and truthfully, she needed to breathe a different kind of air for a few moments. The supermarket was cool, its air-conditioned chill a sharp contrast to the humid corridor she'd just left behind. As she reached for a bottle of leave-in treatment, she heard a laugh, deep, familiar, unguarded. She turned slowly, her hand still mid-air. There he was, Roland, at the pastry counter. Beside him stood a woman in a peach satin blouse, her hair styled in waves, her fingers lightly brushing his wrist as she spoke. The laugh came again, his. That unfiltered, belly-deep kind he hadn't offered at home in months. Elaine ducked behind a shelf of stainless pots, her pulse thudding in her ears like a funeral drum. From that angle, she couldn't see the woman's full face, but her posture spoke volumes. She leaned in like someone with ownership. Roland reached into the glass display and picked 2 red velvet cupcakes. As they waited for the cashier, the woman leaned up and wiped something from the corner of his mouth. Elaine gripped the pot handle, steadying herself. She didn't move until they'd paid and walked out. She then stepped into the queue like a woman possessed by another woman's body. At the checkout, she dropped the dead angler, the conditioner, and, without quite knowing why, a disposable camera. Back at the salon, she placed the items in a supply cabinet and turned the lock without a sound. The rest of the day moved in fragments. Each braid she made, each scalp she oiled, each thread she knotted was done by hands that obeyed while her mind rewound every moment from the store. By nightfall, she sat at her dressing table, peeling the price sticker off the camera. The image of the woman in peach kept returning, not in anger, but in confirmation. Not just that Roland was cheating, but that he had fully exited the room of their marriage and left her talking to the curtain. She thought of confronting him, of throwing plates and demanding names, but then she imagined his face, how calm he'd be, how easily he'd lie, how he'd call her insecure. So instead, she pulled out her notepad and began a new page. At the top, she wrote, "What he doesn't know, I know." Underneath, she listed the supermarket name, time of sighting, partial description of the woman, and Roland's body language. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. What filled her now was not sadness. It was quiet thunder gathering weight. The kind of storm that didn't roar when it arrived. It simply turned the lights off, gently but decisively, and reminded everyone it had been watching all along. The sun over Belmere that Friday was heavy and merciless, the kind of heat that felt like an accusation. It sank into skin, into thoughts, into the corners of one's mind that preferred to forget. Elaine stood on the tiled porch of her neighbor's compound, braiding a child's hair under a frangipani tree that offered more shade than joy. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, but her thoughts wandered to a half-burnt receipt she had found earlier that morning in the pocket of Roland's jeans. He had carelessly tossed the trousers into the laundry basket, forgetting, or perhaps not caring, that secrets had seams too. The paper was crinkled and smelled faintly of spice, bearing the logo of a high-end grill house in the upscale part of town. The date on it stabbed her more than the name of the restaurant. It was the very night he had told her he was stuck at a delivery hub due to system network delay. The words replayed like a chorus in her ears, each repetition stripping another layer of trust. Still, Elaine said nothing. She placed the receipt beneath a pile of folded wrappers, just above her growing stack of quiet evidence. When the client left with her daughter's hair gleaming in neat zigzag cornrows, Elaine packed up her stool and towel, locked the gate, and sat alone inside her parlor. Her hands rested on her thighs, palms up, as if begging the air to speak. But the silence didn't sting anymore. It had become an ally, cool and watchful. She sipped water from her favorite enamel cup and waited for evening, knowing something was coming. She didn't know what, but the wind was shifting. Elaine had always believed that a woman didn't need to scream to be heard. Some truths, when buried, ripen slowly, until the smell of them cannot be ignored. She noticed Roland now made more frequent trips in the name of business, but never once came home with client payments or leftover deliveries. She asked no questions, not out of ignorance, but because she was studying his patterns like a hunter observing prey. One evening, he came home late again, and while peeling oranges in the kitchen, she saw an unfamiliar contact flash across his phone screen, "Baby T, missed call." She didn't panic. She didn't touch the phone. Instead, she wrote the name down on the inside of a soap carton in her bedroom. It joined a growing web of clues, dates, places, smells, even a distinct pink lip gloss she once found on the passenger seatbelt. Elaine had never worn lip gloss a day in her life. That weekend, her friend Veronica invited her to spend a few hours at Dahlia's Salon, an upscale place on the edge of Crown Avenue. Elaine agreed, not out of vanity, but curiosity. She hadn't pampered herself in years, hadn't felt the tug of hot rollers, or the soothing sting of a scalp massage in as long as she could remember. As she stepped into the cool interior of the salon, she felt like a different woman, one unbothered, observant, composed. She didn't know she was walking into the very heartbeat of the storm. The moment came like an accident waiting to happen. Elaine was halfway through a deep conditioning treatment, her hair sectioned and clipped as she sat facing the large salon mirrors. Behind her, stylists danced between clients with combs, towels, and gossip, their chatter forming a background hum of laughter and slang. Then came the sound, the unmistakable vroom of a familiar engine pulling into the gravel lot. Elaine didn't flinch, but her eyes flicked to the mirror, narrowing with intent. Her heart, though steady, began to beat with the purpose of a drum summoning war. A car door opened. Then came the slam. High heels clicked toward the salon. And then she saw her, Tasha. Long-legged, confident, dressed in a short sundress that screamed expensive, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. In her hand was a car key, Roland's key. The car she drove was their car. The same car Elaine had once pushed when it wouldn't start on 3rd Mainland Bridge, the same one she hand-washed every Saturday morning while Roland sipped fruit juice and scrolled his phone. Tasha walked in like a queen returning to her court. She waved at the receptionist, greeted the stylists like family, and chose a seat 2 rows from Elaine, who had already dropped her gaze to avoid recognition. The moment slowed. Every tick of the clock was a loud reminder that this woman, this intruder of vows, had occupied spaces in her life that weren't up for rent. But Elaine didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She watched Tasha laugh. She watched her toss her hair and discuss nail colors. And inside, Elaine's silence took shape, no longer passive but sharp as glass. When Elaine stepped out of the salon hours later, her hair blown into soft waves and her eyes masked by dark glasses, she didn't head home. She walked past Roland's car, parked neatly as if betrayal didn't live in its tires, and took a bike straight to the waterfront. She sat on a bench overlooking the river, her hands resting calmly on her thighs, her soul oddly still. She thought of all the years she'd buried her longings, all the times she had begged love to stay faithful in a house built on secrets. The breeze whispered over her shoulders, and in it she heard a quiet vow, "You will not be buried here." That night, Roland returned home and found his dinner warm and his wife quiet, smiling faintly as she rubbed balm into her knees. He didn't know she had seen Tasha. He didn't know she had watched her paint her nails while holding keys that weren't hers. He didn't know that Elaine had memorized the scent of the woman who rode in the front seat of their marriage. But the seed had been planted, and soil like Elaine's never refused to grow something. That night she kissed Roland on the cheek before turning to her side of the bed, not out of affection, but out of confirmation. Because now she knew, and knowing was no longer a burden, it was her beginning. The weeks that followed felt like sitting in a room with a ticking bomb and smiling politely through tea. Elaine became a woman divided, outwardly calm, inwardly calculating. She cooked Roland's meals, pressed his clothes, and responded to his stories with nods that neither confirmed nor denied interest. But her eyes had changed. They no longer searched for the man she married. They steadied the man he'd become. Every morning she woke with a plan, not the kind written with ink, but the kind carved into bone. Her instincts, once dulled by the need to believe, now moved with a sharpened edge. She had taken a walk to the registry office in Belmere under the guise of visiting a friend, only to inquire about a certain vehicle's papers. The car, Roland's pride, the one Tasha had paraded like a trophy, was still registered in Elaine's name. She had forgotten that detail until that very moment, but life has a way of reminding you where the nails are when you're ready to pull out the frame. She thanked the clerk, smiled faintly, and left with a fresh gust of resolve blowing through her chest. Back home, Roland was laughing over the phone, pacing the living room in house slippers, unaware that the very walls he walked past had begun to memorize the echo of his betrayal. Elaine's resolve didn't taste like revenge. It tasted like air after a thunderstorm, wet, honest, and clearing. She made herself smaller in the house, not from fear, but to observe more. Roland, drunk on the comfort of her silence, began to slip more than usual. He mentioned client lunches with unfamiliar names, smelled of citrus cologne she hadn't bought, and began withdrawing cash that didn't reflect in their household plans. She said nothing. Instead, she collected these moments like pebbles in her apron. One evening, while organizing a cabinet, she found an old photo of them during their first year of marriage, Elaine's head resting on Roland's chest, his eyes full of promise. She stared at it for a long while, running her finger along the edges before placing it face down in a drawer. That love had been real, once, but real doesn't always last. It can be bruised, battered, even beaten into something unrecognizable. And when it reaches that point, you don't mourn it out loud, you bury it properly. Elaine started visiting the back room of her salon after clients left, scribbling short notes to herself. Observations, ideas, dreams she had shelved long ago. The silence that once weighed her down now carried her, like a raft floating above a storm she refused to drown in. Her steps became more purposeful. Her smiles softer but fewer. She wasn't waiting for him to change anymore. She was preparing for when she would. A chance encounter one Tuesday shifted the air again. Elaine had stepped into Greenlight Superstore to replace her broken kettle, and while browsing through stainless pots, she heard a familiar chuckle echo across the aisle. She froze, half-turning just in time to see Roland, laughing, carefree, pushing a cart that held wine, chocolates, and feminine hygiene products. At his side was Tasha, her hair wrapped in a floral scarf, her palm resting possessively on the handle of the cart. They were walking like two people building a life, unaware that life itself had eyes. Elaine ducked behind a tall shelf of cereals, watching them as one might watch a car crash from a distance, frozen, alert, unable to turn away. They strolled toward the bakery section, choosing croissants and arguing playfully over red velvet cake. Roland picked up a slice and fed her a corner with a spoon. Elaine did not cry. Her tears had dried up in a different season. Instead, she reached for her phone and snapped 2 photos, one of the cart, one of them by the pastry stand. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the kettle behind. At home, she printed those images and placed them inside an envelope marked December Rain. It was a private name for a private collection, but it reminded her that storms could be beautiful too, especially when they washed the right things away. Roland returned that evening with a fabricated tale about a delayed delivery to a hotel in New Garden District. Elaine listened as he invented the story, each sentence less believable than the last. When he paused for dramatic affect, waiting for her to ask questions, she only smiled and served him warm egusi soup with goat meat, his favorite. He ate like a man who believed he'd won the war without ever realizing a battle had begun. Elaine sat across from him, sipping water from a clear glass, her mind already miles away. That night, after Roland drifted into a snore-heavy sleep, she rose from the bed and slipped into the parlor. She laid the December Rain envelope in a travel box, zipped it shut, and leaned against the wall, arms folded. Her heart wasn't heavy. If anything, it was finally light, free of guessing, free of begging for crumbs. The woman who once waited for signs was now arranging her own exit. No screams, no scandal, just strategy. Roland might never know the exact moment she changed. He would only feel the absence of her softness when it was gone, and when that day came, she wouldn't be burning bridges. She'd be crossing them barefoot, with peace packed in her pocket like a compass. The seed of her silence had bloomed, and the scent was no longer sorrow. It was survival. The night it finally happened was a Thursday that had dressed itself like any other. There were no dark clouds or flickering lights to foretell what lay ahead. The air outside was still, but inside Elaine's chest, a quiet drum was building tempo. Roland had left that morning in his usual hurry, muttering something about a delivery route in Brookvale. He had spritzed cologne so generously that it lingered long after he closed the door, like a signature he didn't mean to leave behind. Elaine sat by the window for a while, not looking at anything in particular, just letting the wind whisper to her thoughts. She had planned it with the patience of a farmer preparing for harvest. No shouting, no confrontation, just a truth so solid it would carry its own weight. She dressed in soft denim trousers and a peach blouse, tied her hair back in a low bun, and left the house with the envelope clutched inside her bag. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like the sum of everything she'd swallowed over the past 3 years. She took a tricycle to Dahlia's salon, not for beauty this time, but for the final scene of a long brewing play. The receptionist, familiar with her now, smiled politely and pointed to the second row. Elaine nodded, heart calm, and entered. The salon was alive with conversation, laughter curling like smoke in the corners, hairdryers humming like bees on duty. Elaine's eyes found her in seconds. Tasha reclined in a chair with her feet in a basin of rose-scented water, scrolling through her phone like the world owed her peace. Her long nails tapped softly, rhythmically, ignorant of the fire walking toward her. Elaine took the seat directly behind her, heart still quiet, her movements as graceful as a curtain's sway. She listened to Tasha talk about a trip to Zanzibar, about ordering custom curtains, about how R said he'd call the driver to fetch her. It was the last line that pressed the button. Elaine stood up, walked to the small counter where the receptionist stood arranging towels, and handed her the envelope. "Please," she said softly, "give this to her. Tell her it's from his wife." The girl blinked unsure, then nodded and obeyed. Tasha opened the envelope, expecting jewelry or a card. What she saw instead were photos, her and Roland feeding each other cake, receipts from hotels, a printed copy of the vehicle registration bearing Elaine's name, and a note in firm cursive, "You may have borrowed the car, but I never gave you the keys." Tasha froze, her smile cracking like a glass under pressure. She looked around, searching for someone, anyone to explain, but by the time her eyes darted up, Elaine was gone. No confrontation, no slap, just a story handed back to its thief. Back home, Roland returned to silence wrapped in warmth. The living room was lit softly, the scent of egusi soup dancing in the air. Elaine greeted him like she always had, with the same softness he had grown to mistake for stupidity. He bathed, changed into his shorts, and sat to eat. Midway through the meal, his phone rang. Elaine watched as his face changed, a flicker of confusion sweeping across his brow. He stepped outside to answer, thinking he was far from reach. But Elaine had already heard more than enough over the past months. She didn't need to eavesdrop to guess the conversation. When he returned, she stood calmly in the center of the living room, holding a smaller envelope in her hand. "You left this behind," she said, offering it to him. Roland took it without question, opened it slowly, and found the same evidence Tasha had received. This time, there was a handwritten note that read, "A man who can lie to the one who cooked for him will one day starve when she leaves the kitchen." His hands trembled. He tried to speak, but Elaine turned away, walking toward their bedroom. "Eat well," she said over her shoulder. "You'll need the strength to explain who you really are." That night, the silence between them wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence that filled every room with consequence. Elaine didn't pack her bags that night. She didn't leave in a fury or slam doors. She slept peacefully beside a man who had lost the luxury of her ignorance. Morning came, and Roland woke to find the house neat, but unfamiliar. His breakfast was served, but the table was set for one. Elaine had left a note beside his cup. the handwriting neat and curved like her. Truth came to visit. I let her in. That day, Elaine took a cab to a distant part of Belmere where she had leased a small apartment weeks ago. She opened the curtains wide and hailed the light and smiled, not because life was suddenly perfect, but because it was finally hers. There was no music playing, no applause waiting, just the quiet joy of a woman who had stopped begging for honesty and started choosing her own peace. Back at the salon, word began to spread. Tasha stopped showing up. Roland became the man whose car no longer felt like his. And Elaine? She didn't tell anyone the full story. She didn't need to. Some victories are best worn like perfume, noticed but never explained. What mattered now wasn't what she left behind, but what she was stepping into. A life uncluttered by betrayal, a heart that no longer asked for crumbs, and a mirror that no longer reflected a stranger. Weeks had passed since Elaine left without noise or applause, yet her absence sang louder than her presence ever did. In the home she once nurtured, Roland now walked like a man navigating ruins he had built with his own hands. The refrigerator still hummed, the curtains still swayed, but the air had changed, heavier, emptier, colder than absence itself. The meals stopped appearing on the table. The slippers no longer waited by the bed. The quiet had become confrontational. His phone rang less often now. Even Tasha had withdrawn her calls into silence after the embarrassment at the salon. Her ego, bruised in public and punctured by Elaine's calculated calm, no longer found comfort in deception. Roland sat alone most evenings, staring at his reflection on the blank screen of the television. Regret had begun to knock, not with fists, but with memories. He remembered the first time Elaine surprised him with lunch at his workplace. He remembered how she stayed up one night sewing a patch onto his favorite shirt. Now, even those memories had started tasting bitter, like sugar mixed with gravel. He had laughed once when a friend joked that women never really leave, they just threaten. Now, with no footsteps in the hallway and no warmth beside him in bed, Roland understood that some women don't raise their voice. They raise their value and walk away. Elaine, meanwhile, embraced her solitude like a long-lost friend. Her new apartment was nothing fancy. One bedroom, modest kitchen, and windows that framed the orange skies of Belmere at dusk. But to her, it was a palace built on peace. The walls didn't echo with accusation, and the floors welcomed her feet like soil that remembered its seed. She set up a small vanity near the window, not for makeup but for writing. Her notepad grew fuller by the day, not with evidence anymore, but with ideas, reflections, plans. She began offering hair and beauty training to 3 young girls in the neighborhood, charging nothing, just insisting they show up with heart and humility. They called her Auntie Elaine and hung on her every word, as though her wisdom had grown wings. And maybe it had. Sometimes peace plants new gardens where pain once grew. On Sundays, she visited the small cafe on Rosehill Street and sat with a cup of Zobo, watching passers-by without wondering if any of them were lying to someone at home. Her heart didn't leap when her phone buzzed anymore. She no longer paced when evening fell. Roland had sent 3 messages, 2 full of apologies, and 1 asking her to talk like adults. She read them all. She didn't reply. She had nothing to prove, and certainly nothing left to explain. Forgiveness, she believed, didn't always mean return. Sometimes it simply meant freedom. One early morning, Elaine received a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone and approached slowly, towel slung over one shoulder. It was Roland. He stood there with a face that looked like it had been chasing sleep for days. His eyes had lost their luster, his shirt was wrinkled, and his voice, when he spoke, was smaller than she remembered. He asked if he could talk, if they could sit, if she could find it in her to hear him out. Elaine opened the door wider, not as an invitation, but as a decision. She didn't offer him a seat. She stood in her doorway, letting the rising sun spill over both of them. He began to speak, fumbling over apologies and revelations. He admitted to things she already knew, confessed to things she had suspected, and tried to fill the silence between them with promises. When he was done, he looked at her like a man hoping for resurrection. Elaine let the pause stretch, then finally spoke. "I didn't leave because you failed," she said. "I left because I stopped failing myself." Her words weren't angry, just true. Roland asked if there was hope, if she'd consider rebuilding. She smiled not cruelly, but kindly, like someone who had finally arrived at clarity. You don't rebuild on broken foundations. You clear the land and plant something new. With that, she thanked him for coming, wished him well, and gently closed the door. There was no slam, no farewell speech. Just a lock clicking back into place, and a woman exhaling. By the time the dry season gave way to the early promise of rain, Elaine had become someone even she would have applauded a year ago. Her home buzzed with new life, plants by the windowsill, laughter from her young apprentices, a radio playing old high-life songs while she prepared dinner barefoot on tiled floors that had never echoed betrayal. She opened a small training studio 2 streets away, and word of mouth brought in more girls from distant neighborhoods, all eager to learn not just skills, but strength. People often asked if she was married, and she would smile and say, "Once. Now I'm committed to myself." Roland, from what she later heard, had tried to win Tasha back, but ego and exposure made reconciliation impossible. He had sold the car to fix debts and moved to a smaller flat, reportedly quieter than a funeral home. Elaine never wished him harm. In her journal she once wrote, "I don't want revenge. I just want rest." And she found it. Not in a man, not in a mansion, but in a life built by honesty and courage. Her story, now whispered among neighbors and shared like legend by clients, was never told by her. She let her glow speak. The day she walked past Roland at the Westmere Market and he turned away, she didn't call out. She simply kept walking, steps light, shoulders squared. Because some endings don't need a closing remark. They just need a woman to choose herself and never look back. Dear listener, if you ever find yourself constantly shrinking just to keep someone else comfortable, pause. You are not asking for too much when all you desire is honesty, peace, and respect. Love should never make you feel invisible. And if silence becomes your only language, let it be the kind that builds your strength, not hides your truth. Don't be afraid to walk away from what wounds you quietly. Your peace is not too expensive. It is your birthright. May your heart never be a resting place for betrayal. May the eyes that watched your tears one day witness your rising. May your silence not be mistaken for weakness, but become the seed of your strength. May the hands that once wiped away disappointment now build a future that sings of joy. May you be surrounded by truth, uplifted by grace, and never again have to beg for love that should flow freely. May your peace be loud, your glow unshakable, and your days overflow with beauty that cannot be stolen. In the name of the one who restores, may your story end in fullness, not fragments. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.